The gunshot echoed through the dusty main street of Willow Creek, Montana Territory, 1878. But it wasn't the sound that made Abigail Keller drop her basket of freshly purchased goods. It was the sight of a man's body falling from his horse not 10 feet away from her. Blood blossomed across his chest like a crimson flower, and the townsfolk scattered like startled birds as 3 riders galloped away, their laughter trailing behind them like the dust from their horses' hooves. Abigail's first instinct was to run like everyone else, but something held her in place. The man groaned, still alive, and without thinking she rushed to him, dropping to her knees beside his crumpled form. "Someone help," she called, her voice trembling. "Please." The street had emptied in seconds. Even the shopkeeper who had just sold her fabric had barred his door. Her hands hovered uselessly over the stranger's wound, her plain cotton dress already soaking up the blood that pooled beneath him. "Miss," the man gasped, his eyes finding hers. They were startlingly blue against his sun-bronzed face. "Best, get yourself to safety." "I cannot leave you here to die," she whispered, pressing her hands against the wound, feeling his warm blood seeping through her fingers. "Quincy Parker never dies easy," he managed, the ghost of a smile crossing his lips before his eyes fluttered closed. Abigail looked around desperately. No one was coming to help. With a deep breath, she tore a strip from her petticoat and pressed it against his wound. "Mr. Parker," she said firmly, "I am going to help you, but I cannot do it alone. Can you stand just for a moment?" His eyes opened again, focus returning. "I reckon I can try, miss." Abigail Keller, with strength she didn't know she possessed, Abigail helped Quincy to his feet. He was tall, at least a foot taller than her, and heavy with muscle, but somehow they managed to stagger the short distance to her small house on the edge of town. By the time they reached her door, they were both panting, and Quincy was barely conscious. The next few hours passed in a blur as Abigail cleaned and bandaged his wound. The bullet had gone clean through his shoulder, missing anything vital by mere inches. A lucky man, indeed. She'd learned basic medical skills from her father, who had been the only doctor in their small Kansas town before the influenza took him and her mother both, leaving her alone in the world at 18. Now, at 22, she lived quietly in Willow Creek, taking in mending and occasionally helping Mrs. Wilson with childbirths. The townsfolk were kind enough, but they considered her odd, too quiet, too plain, too simple, they whispered behind her back. A woman her age should be married with children already, they said, not living alone with her nose in books and her hands always busy with some craft or another. When Quincy finally regained full consciousness, the moon was high in the sky, casting silver light through the small window of her bedroom, where she'd placed him on her only bed. "Miss Keller." His voice was rough with thirst. Abigail hurried to his side with a cup of water. "You remember my name. Hard to forget the woman who saved my life." He winced as he tried to sit up, and she gently helped him, propping pillows behind his back. "Those were the Clayton brothers. Been tracking them for near on 2 months. You're a lawman." "Bounty hunter," he corrected, taking the water gratefully. "Those 3 have a hefty price on their heads for robbing stage coaches and killing 2 guards up near Helena." Abigail sat back, suddenly wary. "I've brought danger to my door, haven't I?" Quincy's gaze was steady. "They think I'm dead, Miss Keller. They won't come looking, but I should be on my way as soon as I can ride. I won't bring trouble to your doorstep longer than necessary." "You'll tear your wound open if you try to ride tomorrow," she said firmly. "At least 3 days of rest, Mr. Parker." "I insist." A smile quirked the corner of his mouth. "Most folks would have left me in the street." "I am not most folks, Mr. Parker." "No," he said softly. "I can see that." 3 days turned into a week. Quincy's wound healed cleanly, but Abigail insisted he stay until she was certain infection wouldn't set in. The truth, which she kept to herself, was that she enjoyed his company. For the first time in years, her small house felt alive with conversation and laughter. Quincy told stories of his travels. He'd been born in Boston to wealthy parents, but had fled west at 17 after a disagreement with his father. He'd been a cowboy, a gold prospector, a saloon piano player, and finally, a bounty hunter. Each tale was more fascinating than the last to Abigail, who had never ventured more than 50 miles from where she was born. "What about you, Miss Keller?" he asked one evening as they sat on her small porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and pink. "How did you come to be in Willow Creek?" Abigail folded her hands in her lap. "There's not much to tell. I came west after my parents died, looking for a fresh start. Willow Creek was as far as my money took me. And you've been here how long now?" 4 years next month. Quincy studied her face in the fading light. 4 years and still Miss Keller, I find that hard to believe." A blush warmed her cheeks. "The men here find me unsuitable, unsuitable." He sounded genuinely confused. "In what way?" "Too simple, they say." She smiled ruefully. "I don't gossip or flirt. I prefer books to dances. I'm content with my garden and my needlework. The last man who called on me said I was as plain as homespun and twice as dull." Quincy's jaw tightened. "Sounds like a fool to me." "It doesn't matter," she said, rising from her chair. "I'm quite content with my life as it is." But that wasn't entirely true, and as Abigail prepared for bed that night, she admitted to herself that Quincy Parker's presence had awakened something in her, a longing for companionship she'd buried deep after too many disappointments. The next morning, Abigail woke to the smell of coffee brewing. She found Quincy in her kitchen, his shirt unbuttoned as he carefully checked his wound in the mirror she kept hanging by the door. "It's healing nicely," she said, trying not to notice how the morning light traced the contours of his chest or how her heart quickened at the sight. Quincy turned, and for a moment, something passed between them, something warm and unexpected that made Abigail's breath catch. "I believe I have you to thank for that, Miss Keller." He buttoned his shirt with a slight wince. "I'll be heading out tomorrow. Those Claytons have 3 days head start already." "Of course." She busied herself with preparing breakfast, ignoring the disappointment that pressed against her chest. "You have a job to do." "I do," he agreed, but there was a hesitation in his voice that made her look up. "But I was thinking I might return after, if that would be agreeable to you." Abigail nearly dropped the bowl she was holding. "Return to Willow Creek, to you," he said simply. "I find your company refreshing." Before she could formulate a response, a pounding at the door interrupted them. Quincy's hand immediately went to his holster, but Abigail shook her head. "It's probably Mrs. Wilson. Her time is near." She wiped her hands on her apron and went to answer. Instead of Mrs. Wilson, she found Sheriff Tate on her doorstep, his expression grim beneath his bushy mustache. "Miss Keller," he said, tipping his hat. "There's talk you've been harboring a wounded man." "Sheriff," Quincy appeared behind Abigail, fully dressed now and looking remarkably recovered. "Quincy Parker. I took a bullet from the Clayton gang about a week ago. Miss Keller was kind enough to tend to my wound." Sheriff Tate's eyes narrowed. "Parker, the bounty hunter, the same." The sheriff relaxed slightly. "I've heard of you. Good reputation, but you should know the Claytons rode back into town last night, seem to think you're still alive, been asking questions." Abigail felt the blood drain from her face. They're here in Willow Creek." "At the Golden Nugget Saloon," Sheriff Tate confirmed. "Drinking and boasting about how they're going to finish what they started." Quincy's expression hardened. "Miss Keller, pack a bag. You're not staying here tonight." "I'm not leaving my home," she protested. "The Claytons are dangerous men, miss," Sheriff Tate said gently. "If they learn you helped Mr. Parker, they won't hesitate to use you to get to him." "I can take care of myself," Abigail insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. "Sheriff," Quincy said, "can you ensure Miss Keller's safety while I deal with the Claytons?" Sheriff Tate shifted uncomfortably. "Truth is, Parker, I'm on my own here. Deputy's down with a broken leg, and these Claytons, they've got a fearsome reputation. I'm not eager to face 3 of them with just my sidearm." "Then I'll face them," Quincy said grimly. "You're still recovering," Abigail protested. "You'll get yourself killed." "I don't have much choice." Quincy checked his revolver. "They won't stop looking and I won't put you in danger." "There's a third option," Sheriff Tate said. "The stage leaves for Helena in an hour. You both could be on it." Quincy looked at Abigail, his expression unreadable. "It's your decision, Miss Keller, but I won't leave you here unprotected." Abigail felt as though she stood at a crossroads. Stay in the safety of the life she'd built, or step into the unknown with a man she'd known for only a week, a man who lived by his gun and chased dangerous criminals across the frontier. "How long to Helena?" she asked quietly. 2 days, Sheriff Tate replied. "You'd be safe there." "The Territorial Marshal's office has a dozen men." Abigail took a deep breath. "I'll need 15 minutes to pack." As she gathered her essentials, a change of clothes, her mother's silver hairbrush, the small amount of money she kept hidden in a jar, Abigail's mind raced. What was she doing? Abandoning her home on the word of a man she barely knew. And yet, the thought of staying, of Quincy facing those 3 killers alone while still wounded, was unbearable. They slipped out the back way, taking a circuitous route to the stage depot. The coach was already loaded and waiting, the driver checking his timepiece impatiently. "Last call for Helena," he shouted. Quincy helped Abigail aboard, then climbed in after her. There were 2 other passengers, an elderly couple who nodded politely before returning to their conversation. As the stage lurched forward, Abigail caught a final glimpse of her little house, the garden she'd tended so carefully, the life she was leaving behind. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I'll bring you back," Quincy said softly, as if reading her thoughts. "When it's safe." "I promise." The journey to Helena was long and uncomfortable. The stage bounced and swayed over rutted roads, stopping only briefly at way stations to change horses and allow passengers to stretch their legs. Abigail had never traveled by stagecoach before, and by the end of the first day, her entire body ached from the constant jostling. They spent the night at a small roadside inn, where Quincy insisted on taking a room next to hers rather than sharing, despite the innkeeper's assumption that they were husband and wife. The old couple gave them disapproving looks, but Abigail was too exhausted to care about propriety. "Try to get some sleep," Quincy said as they stood in the narrow hallway between their rooms. "We'll be in Helena by tomorrow evening." "And then what?" Abigail asked, voicing the question that had been plaguing her since they left Willow Creek. Quincy's expression softened. "Then we get those wanted posters circulated with the Claytons' faces on them. We get the Territorial Marshal involved, and we make sure it's safe before you go home." "You make it sound so simple." "Sometimes, the simplest solution is the best one." He hesitated, then added, "Get some rest, Abigail." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made her heart skip a beat. "Good night, Quincy," she replied, slipping into her room before he could see the blush rising in her cheeks. Helena was larger and busier than Abigail had imagined. Buildings of brick and stone lined the main thoroughfare, and people from all walks of life hurried along the wooden sidewalks. The Territorial Marshal's office was an imposing structure near the center of town, and it was there that Quincy led her after they disembarked from the stage. Marshal James Thornton was a formidable man with iron gray hair and a reputation for honesty and fairness. He listened carefully as Quincy explained the situation, occasionally jotting notes on a pad of paper. "The Claytons have been causing trouble from here to the Dakota Territory," Marshal Thornton said when Quincy finished. "I've got 5 men I can spare to go after them. But first, we need to get Miss Keller settled somewhere safe." "I can stay at a boarding house," Abigail suggested. "With all due respect, miss," the marshal said, "if these men are as determined as Mr. Parker suggests, a boarding house won't offer much protection." "She can stay at my sister's place," Quincy said. "Rose lives just outside town with her husband. They've got plenty of room and no one would think to look for Abigail there." The marshal nodded approvingly. "That sounds sensible. I'll have wanted posters printed up today and we can ride out tomorrow at first light." Quincy raised an eyebrow. You don't think I'm letting you have all the fun, do you, Parker? Marshall Thornton grinned. Besides, I've got a personal score to settle with the Claytons. They shot one of my deputies last year. Rose Parker Dawson was a plump, cheerful woman with the same startling blue eyes as her brother. She welcomed Abigail without question, showing her to a comfortable bedroom in the spacious farmhouse she shared with her husband, Henry, and their 3 young children. "Any friend of Quincy's is family to us," Rose said warmly, helping Abigail unpack the few belongings she'd brought. "Though I must say, you're the first woman he's ever brought to meet me." "It's not like that," Abigail protested. "Mr. Parker is simply helping me out of a difficult situation." Rose's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced. "My brother doesn't simply do anything, Miss Keller. If he's going to this much trouble, you must be special indeed." Before Abigail could respond, Quincy appeared in the doorway. "Everything all right in here? Just getting Miss Keller settled," Rose said, patting Abigail's hand. "I'll leave you two to talk." She winked at Abigail as she left, closing the door behind her. "Your sister is very kind," Abigail said, smoothing her skirts nervously. "Rose has a big heart." Quincy remained by the door, maintaining a respectful distance. "I wanted to let you know that I'm riding out with Marshall Thornton at dawn." Abigail's heart clenched. "So soon?" "The sooner we find the Claytons, the sooner you can return home." He hesitated, then added, "If that's still what you want." The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibilities neither had voiced. "I don't know what I want anymore," Abigail admitted softly. Quincy took a step toward her, then another. "Abigail, when I first woke up in your house, I thought you were an angel. Then I got to know you, your kindness, your intelligence, the way you see beauty in the simplest things." He took a deep breath. "The men in Willow Creek who called you too simple were blind. What I've found in your company is a kind of peace I've never known." Abigail's heart raced as he came closer still, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. "What are you saying, Quincy?" "I'm saying that when this is over, I'd like the chance to court you properly, if you'll allow it." Before she could respond, he took her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, then withdrew, leaving her breathless and confused. That night, Abigail barely slept. Her mind kept returning to Quincy's words, to the warmth of his lips against her skin, to the possibility of a future she hadn't dared imagine. By morning, she'd made her decision. She would not stay behind while Quincy rode into danger. When she announced her intention to accompany them to the Marshal and Quincy at breakfast, both men immediately protested. "It's too dangerous," Quincy insisted. "I won't be in the way," Abigail argued. "I'll stay in town while you search, but at least I'll be nearby if anything happens." "Nothing's going to happen," Quincy said firmly. "You can't know that." Abigail met his gaze steadily. "I've spent 4 years playing it safe, Quincy. I left Kansas because I was afraid to stay where memories of my parents were so painful. I settled in Willow Creek because it was small and quiet and safe. I've let fear guide my choices for too long." "This isn't about fear, it's about keeping you alive," Quincy countered. "Let her come," Marshall Thornton interrupted. "We'll be stopping in Silver Creek first. It's a decent-sized town, and my wife's there visiting her sister. Miss Keller can stay with them while we search the surrounding area." Quincy looked like he wanted to argue further, but after a tense moment, he nodded reluctantly. "Fine. But you stay in town, understand? No heroics." "I promise," Abigail said, relieved. "No heroics." They set out an hour later, Abigail riding a gentle mare borrowed from Rose. The Marshal's posse consisted of 5 deputies, all experienced lawmen with hard eyes and quiet demeanors. They rode at a steady pace, covering ground quickly but not pushing their horses too hard. Abigail had never ridden so far before, and by midday, her legs and back were screaming in protest. She said nothing, determined not to be the one to slow them down, but Quincy seemed to sense her discomfort. "We'll stop at the next creek," he announced, dropping back to ride beside her. "Give the horses a rest." "I'm fine," she insisted. "I know you are," he said with a gentle smile. "But I'm not. Wounds still healing, remember? She knew he was lying to spare her pride, but she was grateful nonetheless. The creek was cool and clear, running between banks lined with cottonwoods that provided welcome shade from the afternoon sun. While the men watered the horses and consulted their maps, Abigail soaked her handkerchief in the cold water and pressed it to the back of her neck, sighing with relief. "Not as easy as it looks in those dime novels, is it?" Quincy said, settling beside her on a fallen log. "Nothing ever is," she replied with a rueful smile. "You're doing well, though. Most city folk would have been complaining from the first mile." "I'm not city folk," Abigail reminded him. "I grew up on a farm in Kansas." "So you did." Quincy leaned back, studying her face. "You know, in all our conversations, you've told me very little about yourself." Abigail looked down at her hands. "As I said, there's not much to tell." "I don't believe that." His voice was gentle. "Everyone has a story, Abigail. I'd like to hear yours if you're willing to share it." Something in his tone, in the genuine interest in his eyes, made Abigail want to open up in a way she hadn't in years. "I was born in a small town called Riverdale," she began. "My father was the doctor there, and my mother taught at the local school. We had a good life, not wealthy, but comfortable. They encouraged me to read, to think for myself, to question the world around me." She smiled at the memory. "I was studying to be a teacher, like my mother, when the influenza came." Quincy said nothing, but his hand found hers, offering silent support. "They both fell ill within days of each other. I cared for them as best I could, but—" She swallowed hard. "They died within hours of each other. It was as if my father couldn't bear to live without my mother, and she felt the same." "I'm sorry," Quincy said softly. "After the funeral, I couldn't stay. The house, the town, everything reminded me of them, so I sold what I could, packed what mattered, and bought a ticket west. I had this romantic notion that I would find adventure and purpose." She laughed bitterly. "Instead, I found Willow Creek and a life smaller than the one I'd left behind." "Is that why you helped me? For a taste of adventure?" Abigail shook her head. "I helped you because it was the right thing to do, because my father taught me that every life has value, even the life of a disreputable bounty hunter." "You're not disreputable," she said firmly. "You're a good man, Quincy Parker." He looked skeptical. "I've done things I'm not proud of." "Haven't we all?" She squeezed his hand. "It's what we choose now that matters." The moment stretched between them, intimate and charged with possibility, until Marshall Thornton's voice broke the spell. "Parker, we found tracks." They reached Silver Creek by nightfall. It was a town in the midst of transformation, half frontier settlement, half aspiring city, with a mix of rough wooden structures and more ambitious brick buildings lining its streets. Marshall Thornton's wife, Catherine, and her sister, Eleanor, welcomed Abigail warmly into their comfortable home on the edge of town. After a hot meal and a proper bath luxuries, Abigail hadn't realized how much she'd missed. She felt almost human again. "The men will be fine," Catherine assured her as they sat in the parlor sipping tea. "James has been chasing outlaws for 20 years. He knows what he's doing. And Quincy is no amateur," Eleanor added. "His reputation precedes him." "That's what worries me," Abigail admitted. "The kind of life he leads, it's so dangerous." The sisters exchanged knowing glances. "You care for him," Catherine observed. "I hardly know him," Abigail protested weakly. "Sometimes the heart knows what it wants long before the head catches up," Eleanor said with a smile. "I knew my Harold was the one for me the moment he helped me up after I slipped in the mud outside the mercantile. Covered head to toe in dirt, and all I could think was, this is the man I want to spend my life with." "It wasn't quite that dramatic for James and me," Catherine added. "But I do remember feeling like I'd found something I hadn't even known I was looking for." Abigail thought of the moment Quincy had opened his eyes in her bedroom, the connection she'd felt instantly with this stranger who disrupted her quiet life. "I'm afraid," she confessed. "Not just of losing him to a bullet, but of what loving him would mean. His life has no roots." "Men can change," Catherine said gently. "When James and I met, he was a drifter too. 17 years later, he still wears that badge, but he comes home to me every night. Unless he's chasing outlaws, Alina teased. Catherine swatted her sister's arm playfully. Hush, you. The point is, love has a way of settling even the most restless spirits. Abigail wasn't convinced, but she was too tired to argue. She retired to the guest bedroom, her dreams filled with images of Quincy facing down the Clayton brothers, of bullets flying and blood spreading across the dusty ground. The men were gone for 3 days. 3 days that stretched Abigail's nerves to the breaking point, despite Catherine and Alina's best efforts to distract her. She helped with cooking and cleaning. She read books from their well-stocked library. She even attempted to teach Alina's youngest daughter to embroider, but her thoughts remained with the posse and their dangerous mission. On the morning of the 4th day, Abigail was helping Catherine hang laundry when the sound of approaching horses made them both turn toward the road. A group of riders appeared, dust billowing behind them, and Abigail's heart leaped when she recognized Quincy's broad shoulders among them. But something was wrong. They were moving too slowly, and as they drew closer, she could see a body draped over one of the horses. James, Catherine's voice was tight with fear. He's fine, Alina said quickly, squinting at the approaching riders. I can see him at the front. Abigail didn't wait for them to reach the house. She gathered her skirts and ran down the path toward the road, her heart pounding. As she drew closer, she could see that Quincy was slumped in his saddle, his shirt darkened with what could only be blood. Quincy. She called out, her voice breaking. He looked up at the sound of his name, his face pale but his eyes alert. Abigail, he said, his voice rough. We got them. Marshal Thornton dismounted quickly and came to her side. It looks worse than it is, he assured her. One of the Claytons got off a lucky shot before we subdued him. The bullet just grazed Quincy's side. A graze that needed 15 stitches, one of the deputies added with a grim laugh. Let me see, Abigail demanded as they helped Quincy down from his horse. It's nothing, he protested, but winced when he tried to straighten. Inside, Catherine ordered, taking charge. Alina, fetch clean bandages and my medical kit. James, help Mr. Parker to the guest room. Within the hour, Abigail had cleaned and redressed Quincy's wound, which was indeed a deep graze along his ribs. The local doctor had done a neat job with the stitches, but the wound was red and hot to the touch. You need to rest, she told him firmly. No arguments. Yes, madam, he said with a weak smile, though I should tell you what happened. The marshal already did, Abigail said, pulling a chair to his bedside. You tracked the Claytons to an abandoned mine 10 miles west of here. There was a shootout. 2 of the brothers surrendered after you wounded the eldest. That's the short version, Quincy conceded. Did he tell you it was your advice that saved us? My advice? To keep it simple, Quincy explained. The Claytons had the high ground, had us pinned down behind some boulders. The marshal wanted to split up, try to outflank them, but I remembered what you said at the creek about choosing what matters now. He took her hand. I convinced him to wait until nightfall, then approach directly under cover of darkness. No complicated strategy, just 6 men walking straight up to their camp with guns drawn while they slept. That was incredibly dangerous, Abigail scolded, but effective, he countered. And it meant no one got killed on either side. The Claytons will hang, most likely, but it'll be after a fair trial, not dying in the dirt from a lawman's bullet. Abigail understood then what he was telling her, that he'd chosen a solution that preserved life, that reflected the values she'd expressed. It touched her deeply. I'm proud of you, she said softly. There's something else. Quincy shifted, grimacing at the pain. When that bullet hit me, all I could think about was you, not the bounty, not the satisfaction of catching those killers, just you, your smile, your voice, the way you see the world. He took a deep breath. I realized something, Abigail. I'm tired of chasing, tired of living by my gun. I want something simpler. Her heart raced. What are you saying? I'm saying that when we return to Willow Creek, I'd like to stay if you'll have me. His eyes held hers. The marshal offered me a job as his deputy in the Helena office, but I told him I had other plans. "What plans?" Abigail whispered. "There's a small ranch for sale outside Willow Creek. Needs work, but the land is good. I've saved most of my bounty money over the years." He squeezed her hand. "I know it's sudden, and I know we haven't known each other long," but Abigail leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, silencing him with a kiss that surprised them both with its boldness. When she pulled back, his eyes were wide. "Is that a yes?" he asked, a slow smile spreading across his face. I think we should court properly first, but with a strong inclination toward yes," she replied, her cheeks flushed. Quincy laughed, then winced, pressing a hand to his side. "I can work with that." They returned to Willow Creek 2 weeks later, once Quincy was well enough to travel comfortably. The town seemed different to Abigail, now smaller, perhaps, but also more welcoming. Sheriff Tate greeted them with news that Abigail's house had been left undisturbed, and the townsfolk had even tended her garden in her absence. "Word gets around," the sheriff explained with a wink. "Folks were mighty impressed that you helped bring down the Clayton gang." The small ranch Quincy had mentioned was 5 miles outside town, a weathered cabin, a barn in need of repair, and 50 acres of good grazing land bordered by a creek. They rode out to see it the day after their return, Abigail's heart swelling as Quincy described his vision for the place. "It won't be fancy," he cautioned. "Not at first, but with time and work." "It's perfect," Abigail said, meaning it. The simplicity of it, the honest labor it would require, the peace it promised, all of it called to something deep within her. Their courtship was proper but swift. Quincy took a room at the boarding house in town and called on Abigail every evening after working on the ranch during the day. They took walks, shared meals, talked for hours about everything and nothing. The townsfolk watched with interest, and Abigail noticed that the women who had once called her too simple now regarded her with a mixture of envy and respect. 6 months to the day after Quincy had been shot in the main street of Willow Creek, they were married in the small white church at the edge of town. Rose came from Helena with her family, and Marshall Thornton stood as Quincy's best man. Mrs. Wilson, who had become a dear friend to Abigail, served as her matron of honor. As they exchanged their vows, Abigail looked into Quincy's blue eyes and saw her future reflected there, not a life of grand adventure or wealth, but one of deep contentment and genuine partnership. The ranch flourished under their care. Quincy proved to be a natural with livestock, and Abigail's garden expanded to feed not only themselves but also to provide vegetables for sale in town. They added onto the cabin, built a proper chicken coop, and dug a new well closer to the house. A year after their wedding, on a crisp autumn evening, they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Abigail's hand rested on the gentle swell of her belly where their first child grew. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked suddenly. "The excitement of the chase, the freedom to go wherever the next bounty took you?" Quincy considered the question seriously, as he did all of Abigail's questions. "Sometimes I miss the places I haven't seen yet," he admitted. "The mountains in California, the coast of Oregon. But I don't miss the life." He covered her hand with his own, feeling the movement of their unborn child. "This you, our home, our baby, this is everything I never knew I wanted." "A simple life," she murmured, "the best kind." Quincy smiled, lifting her hand to kiss her palm. "You were called too simple once, and now look at us. You've taught me that simplicity isn't boring or plain, it's a kind of heaven if you know how to see it." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Abigail leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that sometimes the greatest adventures are found in the quietest moments, and the deepest love blooms in the simplest of hearts.